let me just give you a brief resume for any who are new or for those who've completely forgotten much of what I've said already. So just to remind you that because of a famine, an Israelite family of four, that's two parents and two sons, decide to relocate and move from Israel to neighboring Moab, which is modern-day Jordan. However, tragedy strikes, for within 10 years of moving to Moab, all the men in the family had died. That's three of them, the two sons with their father. And since each son had taken a Moabite wife, that leaves now three women living in Moab, all of whom were widows. The two young wives of the sons and their older Jewish mother-in-law, Naomi. However, when news is received the famine is over, Naomi decides to return to Israel. But this, of course, would have been a completely foreign land for the Moabite girls, Ruth and Orpah, so she urges them to stay in Moab. And there's a very intense emotional scene with a lot of weeping and kissing. Finally, Orpah decides to stay in Moab, but Ruth decides to stay with her mother-in-law. She clings to her, and she makes this wonderful declaration in chapter 1, verse 16. Speaking to Ruth, to Naomi, she says, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." So the two of them arrive in Israel, the country from which Naomi came, but of course it's a completely foreign land for Ruth. Then in chapter 2, enter Boaz. Boaz is a wealthy and highly regarded relative by marriage of Naomi. Ruth starts gleaning in his fields, and before long we realize that not only is he treating her very well, but he seems to be taking a personal interest in her and granting her special favors. Now, although he's a generation older than Ruth, you begin to wonder whether a relationship might be about to develop. And as you read, you find this account is beginning to show all the signs of a classic romantic love story. Significantly, Ruth also learns from Naomi that Boaz is a kinsman redeemer. Now, that phrase means that according to the law in Israel, that when someone was widowed, it was the responsibility of the closest unmarried man in the family to take her as his bride so that she will not be left destitute, and so also hopefully through children the family name can continue. Now, at the end of chapter 2, we're all left wondering if Ruth and Boaz are going to get it together. So this story actually has become something of a page turner. So let's turn the page, and I'm going to read Ruth chapter 3. I'm going to read the whole chapter, but I don't think I'm going to be able to get all through the whole chapter in terms of teaching it. Not because it's a long chapter, but because there's so much truth, so much practical application as we go along. So, Ruth chapter 3, reading again from the NIV. One day, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the corn pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. Who are you? He asked. I am your servant Ruth, she said. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem, good, let him redeem. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning. So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, don't let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. He also said, bring me the shawl you're wearing and hold it out. When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, how did it go, my daughter? Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. Thus reads the word of God. We bow just for a short prayer. Father, thank you for your word. I pray now the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts may be acceptable in your sight, O Lord our God and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, some time has passed and life is now settled into a fairly familiar routine. Ruth, I guess, is progressively becoming more acquainted with the people of Israel, the culture of Israel, and the language of Israel. And it's after this period of time has passed that Naomi decides it's time to take some action. She didn't want Ruth to be forever tied to her apron strings, gleaning, and also carrying the burden of having to feed both herself, Naomi, and herself. And she didn't want her to be constantly dependent on others and on their charity. After all, Ruth had done all the hard work. She'd sacrificed a lot to leave her people and to support and care for Naomi. Now, Naomi is not kicking her out, but she feels compelled, I would say even responsible, to find a way for Ruth to gain some independence. She needs to have her own home, her own resting place. And she needs an identity separate from just being labelled Naomi's Moabite daughter-in-law. Reminds me of my own mother, who said to me after a while, she said, people are always saying to me, are you Gareth's mother? And she says, do you know what I say now? I said, no, I don't. She says, I now say, no, I'm not Gareth's mother. He is my son. Well, quite unsubtly and directly, Naomi begins to make feelings known. She's a Jewish mother-in-law, and they've got quite a reputation for straight speaking, and they're quite strong personalities, if you know any of them. She's not going to sit around all day humming "Que sera, sera," whatever will be, will be. There's no sort of fatalism here. There's no, well, why don't we just wait and see what happens? I mean, of course, she believes and we believe and trust in God to work out all things. I mean, I trust we believe in the sovereignty of God, but I hope we also believe in the responsibility of man. Naomi's attitude is, let's go for it. Come on, we've been here a while now. Let's make a move. Let's push a few doors. Let's see what happens. Of course, it's all in God's hands, but she clearly believes that faith is spelt R-I-S-K, risk. And as I see her, I seem to, over my life, met so many over the years who've spent decades waiting to hear from God as to what they should do, and they're still waiting decades later. So Naomi starts to initiate a bit of matchmaking, motivating Ruth in part to actively start looking for a husband. Of course, Ruth has been gleaning in Boaz's fields with his female employees. Naomi also reminds her of the important fact that Boaz is a relative of ours, although in reality he's only a distant relative of Ruth's, and that only by marriage via her late father-in-law. Nonetheless, Naomi explains that he will be threshing the barley crop that night with his employees on the threshing floor. You see, what happened is from late afternoon till early evening, the Mediterranean winds would rise from the sea. And so that would be the time for threshing, when Boaz and his workers would thresh on the hillside outside the village. You would throw the grain against the wind, so the lighter husk would separate and blow away, and then they would gather up and keep the grain. Sifting and bagging would have taken place after dark. And it's interesting that here is a boss who doesn't stand on ceremony. He's not ashamed himself to work late, to work hard alongside his employees, rather than just hanging out in the air-conditioned office drinking lattes. Here's a man who's with the men. Reminds me of an English guy who went to visit our very first ship. In OM we have some ships, and the first one was Logos. He was a volunteer. I think he was just spending a day or two there, and they put him down in the book hold where you had to gather books and send them up to the book fair above where they would sell them. He was working with the young American all day long and chatting with him, and towards the end of the day, the American said, "Well, have you enjoyed your time here?" And the lad said, "Well, I have, but I'm a bit disappointed, really." So the guy said to him, "Well, why are you disappointed?" He said, "Well, I was hoping that I might meet George Verwer, you know, the man that founded Operation Mobilization." "Oh, are you?" said the American lad. "You're talking to him." So finally, any possible doubts or misunderstandings that Ruth or the readers of this story might have entertained regarding the direction this conversation is going between Naomi and Ruth are all blown away. But what is Naomi suggesting? Ruth, get cleaned up, get dressed up, make sure you smell nice, and off you go. What's all this about? Is this so she can get ready to spend the night clubbing? Is Naomi suggesting that she goes out and does a bit of man hunting? Surely Naomi hasn't stooped to suggesting that Ruth tries some open seduction as part of her plan. Well, if we really believe that, we failed to appreciate the character and integrity and spirituality of three main players in this story: Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz. I mean, it's important that she is attractive. Of course it is. There's nothing wrong with being attractive. There's everything wrong with being seductive. And there's a difference. Us men know the difference, and I guess you ladies do as well. In short, the plan is for Ruth to propose marriage to Boaz. Now, this isn't Ruth being pushy or forward. This is all being done properly. It's actually all being done in accordance with the law of the time. The law was called the Levirate law. Now, Levirate is from the Hebrew word levir, which is the word meaning son-in-law. What it means is that when a man dies with no male children, his brother or another relative is to marry the widow and father, hopefully a son, for the deceased brother. So that's the law, and that's simply what's happening here in the book of Ruth. It's also probably worth pointing out that since Boaz was a generation older than Ruth, it's fairly unlikely he would have initiated such a proposal himself. So Naomi says, slip into the barn quietly, make sure he doesn't know you're there, and wait until the eating and the drinking has finished and he and his workers are asleep. Now, she has some very precise instructions, interesting instructions for Ruth. Firstly, Ruth is to look out for and remember the place where Boaz is lying. That will be important because it would be quite dark. It would also be important because it would be disastrous if she approached the wrong man, and it could have all sorts of serious consequences. So she says, sometime later, when he is asleep, she is to uncover his feet and lie down. Now, you may ask, this is rather unusual and potentially risky behavior, isn't it? Well, it's important to notice what is happening here. It's also important to notice what is not happening here. Unfortunately, it is hard to read this whole story without letting the narrative of our culture suggest that this is just the prelude to some sort of immoral behavior. Sadly, today's spin on this story would be very different. And the drip feed of 21st century sexual innuendo, much of which is open filth, to be honest, has affected us all. It's very sad. When did you last hear in the media words like modesty or shame? I don't think you hardly ever hear them publicly spoken. What you will hear a lot about is personal freedom, personal choice, personal human rights. And the result is an avalanche, a deluge of teenage pregnancy, of problems with sexting, of pornography. And so people say, well, the answer is we need more education. We need to throw more money at these problems. The answer is a return to godly morality and Christian spirituality. And so to see this story as some sort of sexual adventure in a barn is not only to put a contemporary Western interpretation on it, but it's to completely misunderstand the integrity, the culture, and the intentions of the key players. Someone has said about this passage, if you read it carefully, you will find this event is marked by decorum, restraint, purity, and even majesty. One commentator says this of this passage: the narrator uses the utmost delicacy, and the fact that Naomi was prepared to urge this course of action on Ruth is the measure of her trust in both the participants. All the more is this the case since in the ancient Near East, immoral practices at harvest times were by no means uncommon, and indeed appear to have been encouraged by the fertility rites practiced in some religions. Naomi then informs Ruth he will give her some instructions. And her reaction, verse 5, I will do whatever you say. That's an amazing response from Ruth. No hesitation, no questions from Ruth, no sort of, but what if, Naomi, or but suppose, Naomi. No, just humble obedience as she implicitly trusts her mother-in-law and does exactly as Naomi tells her. I mean, I love this relationship between Ruth and Naomi. If you think about it, they're each looking out for the other. Naomi, concerned for Ruth, that she has some freedom, some independence, and above all, a husband. Ruth, concerned for Naomi, her mother-in-law, that she will have enough food to eat. It's interesting, isn't it, the role that parents play or don't play in marriage. In much of the world, the role of parents is very significant. Some of you are listening to this message from India. And you'll know there, and I know very well after over 50 visits to India, that arranged marriages are still the main way that weddings and marriages happen. I've spoken at 1, 2, or 3 arranged marriages in India. When we say arranged marriage, we mean a marriage where the couple often are not even spoken together. They've seen each other, but they've had no long conversation. It's arranged because the parents of the guy and the parents of the girl have met together, have spoken together, have discussed the suitability of the one for the other, and have agreed that it should go ahead. And my experience actually is that arranged marriages have a better track record than many love marriages today. Although increasingly in the West, in this country, in the UK, even marriage is becoming less common, and more frequently we find couples just choosing to live together. I will do whatever you say, Ruth answers. Echoes here of another Mary, the mother of Jesus, who told the servants at a wedding in Cana of Galilee, do whatever he tells you. Ruth's life continues to be marked by humble obedience and trusting faith. The role of the parents in marriage still should be significant. Not that they necessarily dictate the outcome, but have a vital input, because who knows us better than our own parents? I remember, just an aside, that when I was thinking about Malou and courting Malou, I wanted my parents to meet her. My father was then alive. And for me, it was very important that they were happy with the choice I was making. And I think if they said no, or had really had doubts about it, even though I was, believe it or not, in my 40s at the time, I think I still would have agreed with them, and maybe the relationship would not have continued. I don't know. So she went in humble obedience and trusting faith to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. Alistair Begg says this: the barn is full of men in good spirits. That's what it says there in verse 7. Good spirits, not high spirits. Remember, there's been years of famine. So this is a very natural way of celebrating after a harvest has been gathered in. So they've all just had a good meal together and they've gone to sleep. And there is BOAZ at the far end of the grain pile, probably snoring away. Ruth approaches quietly and covers his feet and lies down. Now notice, she doesn't lie alongside him as a man lies with a woman, but she lies at his feet. It's all very visual, isn't it? We can see this in our mind's eye being enacted out, choreographed, one senses, not simply by Naomi, but planned for a purpose greater even than for the lives of these two individuals. We have to read on. Where is this all heading? What is the greater picture here? This is a page turner. It will be inconceivable to stop at this point. Lying at his feet. You may recall that many years later, another Mary would sit at the feet of Jesus. I mean, to be at someone's feet is a position of humility. It's a position of respect. It's of openness to receive from the one who is perceived to be greater. Now, we don't know for sure who the author of the book of Ruth is, possibly Samuel, but in telling this story, he catches something of the humor of the situation. It's not evident that it was the arrival of Ruth that made Boaz jump and that awoke him, but in suddenly awaking, he finds a woman lying at his feet. He's startled. "Who are you?" he asks. You might say, well, why does he ask, "Who are you?" He surely had been watching Ruth and knew Ruth. Yes, but firstly, this is in the dark. And secondly, this isn't Ruth in her gleaming clothes, rough clothes with some sort of headscarf around sweating. This is Ruth with her hair beautifully presented, in her best clothes, and would have appeared very different from that sweaty labourer toiling in the fields. I mean, I think sometimes, you know, even when I'm asleep at night and maybe Malou comes in the room later for some reason and I jump, you know, you say, "Who is it?" So Boaz, he asks here for some ID, as it were. But notice how prepared Ruth was with her answer, her plan of action. I mean, we don't read that Naomi had explained what was going to happen or told Ruth what she had to say, but clearly Ruth has now understood the concept of kinsman redeemer and what this might entail for her. This act of being covered by the corner of his garment was tantamount to a marriage proposal. She's inviting him, as it were, to cover her. And again, we don't have to go very far without realizing this is a picture of Jesus as our kinsman redeemer. As she lay at the feet of Boaz, so we cast our burdens, our lives, at the feet of Jesus Christ. She was dependent upon his mercy. We're dependent on Christ's mercy. And as she was covered by the corner of his garment, so we're covered by the blood of the covenant by which he welcomes us with his loving kindness. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replies. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier." Boaz commends her for her kindness. And in doing so, he uses this incredibly rich Hebrew word, hesed. Hesed, it's found 250 times in the Old Testament. And it's not merely speaking about emotion or feelings. This is a loving kindness that involves action on behalf of someone who is in need. Again, this is a picture of Christ, God's loving kindness for us. One commentator says this, he said, "It describes a sense of love and loyalty that inspires merciful and compassionate behavior towards another person. It's the word used of God's covenant relationship with us, his love for us. Hence, it is sometimes rendered loving kindness. Hesed surpasses ordinary kindness and ordinary friendship." We see in Boaz and Ruth glimpses of what we will later see in Jesus. And through both of them, we find in the Old Testament pictures of the Messiah. The Lord bless you, my daughter, says Boaz. So as he blessed his employees in chapter 2, Boaz now blesses this young lady, whom he respectfully refers to as his daughter, in the very same way that Naomi on a number of occasions had already expressed. And we see how deep, how real is Boaz's faith, and how much the Lord's name is on his tongue and in his heart. Having blessed her, he commends her for her kindness, which he says is even greater than that she had earlier shown. So what kindness was that? Well, it was her whole life. It was turning back on her pagan Moabite culture. It was moving out in faith, in love for Naomi, in love for Naomi's God as well, caring for Naomi, and now caring for Boaz. He says, you could have married any other younger man, but you've chosen me. Age and riches were not priorities for you. In a marriage that displays physical beauty, quick-wittedness, financial security, educational compatibility, can have all those things, and yet it can still fall far short of God's ideal, because those things will never be able to replace integrity and virtue. I mean, we may ask why Ruth is here at all. Is it because of Naomi's concern for her? Yes, in part. Is it because of Ruth's concern for Naomi? Yes. But ultimately, this whole story is also part of God's greater plan for them, and incredibly also for us. And now, my daughter, he goes on, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. His Christ-like response continues, don't be afraid, he says. I mean, that same command occurs 14 times in the New Testament, usually on the lips of Jesus. He also declares, Boaz, I will do for you all you ask. I will do all you ask. Reminiscent of the promise Jesus made to his disciples, whatever you ask in my name, I will do it. Boaz then praises her. For what? Not for her looks, not for her personality, not even for the chemistry that may be between the two. Not that all those things are unimportant, they are important, but he praises her for her reputation for being a woman of noble character, a virtuous woman. Seems to me he's greatly attracted, particularly attracted by her internal beauty. And that is what will last, even as outward beauty fails. The end of the book of Proverbs, Solomon famously asked the question, who can find a wife of noble character? And then goes on to list those characteristics. Well, there we are. There's much more I could say. But I think we've already learned some significant lessons today. We're seeing Christ here in the Old Testament through the lives of Boaz, of Naomi, and of Ruth. Father, thank you that this ancient book speaks to our contemporary lives and culture. Help us to learn these lessons. Help us to honour you. Help us not to go with the flow, if going with the flow means we go in a different direction from the way that you would take us. And help us to be proactive, trusting you for your glory. In Jesus' name we ask it. Amen.
Amen.
We have a few seconds left. God bless you. Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
And come and join us next week for the next
Thank
episode
you.
in this exciting story.
Thank you for a great
Thank
message, Gareth.
you.
A pleasure. God bless you all.
God bless you. Safe
Have a
journey.
great day.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, Gareth.
Well done, yeah. Good. Bless you. Glad we
Bless
got
you,
on there.
Dave. Yeah, bless you.
Thank you. Safe journey, brother.
Thank you very much.
Philippines.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.